light, does it not? And our world in these days. So did our political leaders follow COVID restrictions? We know the Prime Minister didn't, and now there's a question whether Keir Starmer followed the restrictions that were in place during the pandemic. Well, here in Luke chapter 6, there are questions about, is Jesus following Sabbath restrictions? And that's the debate that goes on here in these two events. It's a key area of conflict between Jesus and the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. All four Gospels report this area of conflict regarding the Sabbath, and probably already the event that's recorded in John chapter 5. You remember, boys, we did it at the all-age special when Jesus went to where there was a pool and all sick people around it. How long had the man been ill? 38 years, so close. 38 years, and Jesus commanded him to do what? Yeah. Pick up his mat, walk and go home. And he did. But it was the Sabbath. It was the Sabbath. And what are you doing carrying your mat on the Sabbath? The people said to him. The Pharisees said to him, what are you doing carrying your mat? It's not lawful on the Sabbath. Well, the man who healed me told me to do it, the man said. Well, I think that's already occurred down in Jerusalem. And now back in Galilee, there is further conflict. And again, later in Luke's Gospel, in chapter 13 and chapter 14, we'll find other events regarding this conflict, regarding keeping Sabbath restrictions or not. So in the first instance then, in chapter 6, verses 1 to 5, we can entitle this, when laws can be broken. When laws can be broken. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the cornfields and his disciples began to pick some ears of corn, rub them in their hands to get the kernels off, to get the other stuff off and eat the grain. The Pharisees, they considered picking and rubbing ears of corn as work. We read, didn't we, the commandment on the Sabbath day, you shall not do any work. You shall not do any work. The Pharisees, well, that's work. You're reaping as you pick the ears of corn. You're grinding as you rub it in your hands. You're preparing food. Those things, that's all work. They had drawn up 39 principal works that you were not allowed to do on the Sabbath. And each of them had 6 subdivisions of minor work. So they had this great list of the work you must not do. And picking ears of corn, rubbing them, eating them, broke their rules. This was later on, these rules were committed to writing. And it says that reaping and grinding corn greater in bulk than a dried fig was forbidden. So you could do corn the size of a dried fig, but any more than that, forbidden. Some of the Pharisees asked, asking the disciples, why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? Well, Jesus brings this example of David to bear. Jesus answered them, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. So here is this rule that had been made regarding that bread that was set out each Lord's Day, 12 loaves of bread that was there. And it says in Leviticus 24 The bread belongs to Aaron and his sons, the priests, who are to eat it in a holy place because it is part of the regular share of the offerings made to the Lord by fire. It's special bread that only the priests can eat. But here David goes to the house of God and it is given this bread. It shows that Jesus brings forward the example of David to show that the law was not to be applied inhumanely. That law regarding the bread was not to be applied inhumanely. So if there was a human need, that law could be suspended so that others could have that bread. You know, David, who we're told, aren't we, in the scripture, and these Pharisees should know that was a man after God's own heart. David, a man after God's own heart, asked for this, took this bread, and the high priest was willing to give David this bread. They understood that something consecrated could be used for humanitarian purposes to meet need. And so Jesus brings that example of David, who they revered and respected, a man after God's own heart, who took what is lawful only for priests to eat, because there was a humanitarian need for him and his men. Had no provisions with them. They were on the run, as we thought earlier. They take that bread. It's interesting that in Matthew and Mark, who also record this incident, other elements of Jesus's response are included, other reasons that Jesus gives why the disciples are allowed to do what they were doing. But Luke just concentrates on this particular one, that being humane, responding to need, is more important than following the letter of the law. It was true for David and his men. Well, Jesus says, for my disciples, they are hungry, they're in need of sustenance, and just as David and the men who served him, their needs had to be met, so my disciples, they're serving me, the son of David. And it's right that their needs should be met. So laws can be broken when there is a real need that needs to be met and responded to. We can't be inhumane in applying the law. I mean, Jesus could have pointed out that these were their rules about those 39 areas with their 6 subsections. That's your rules, not God's rules. But he didn't. He gets to the principle. Jesus always comes to the principle that is to be applied, and that's regarding God's grace and goodness in the care of his people. So that's when laws can be broken. In the second incident, the healing of the man with the withered hand, this becomes a question about what is lawful. What is lawful? So on another Sabbath, we read in verse 6, Jesus went into the synagogue and was teaching. And a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. It's only Luke who tells us it was his right hand that was shriveled. Is it Dr. Luke bringing out the details? But the right hand is very important in Eastern cultures. I remember when I went out to Bangladesh, I joined an OM team for a week or two. And this young man in the team, he noticed that I wrote left-handed. My dad beat me, he said. I wrote left-handed, and my dad beat me until I stopped and started writing with my right hand. So this man, it's not just a disability, it's a serious social problem for him to have an injured right hand. Well, the Pharisees and the scribes, they're after Jesus. Verse 7 tells us the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. We saw, didn't we, that last time, that they're already critical and hostile to Jesus. They're not open-minded. They're not neutral. They're already after Jesus. So they're out to see. And I wonder if that earlier incident, had they been spying on Jesus and his followers as they set out to cross those cornfields, how far is he going to travel on the Sabbath? They had rules about how far you could travel on the Sabbath. Perhaps they were watching Jesus. Is he going to break that rule? But here they are. They're out to get Jesus. They're looking for an occasion to accuse him, to see if he will heal. But healing on the Sabbath? Well, again, it's later in Luke chapter 13, when Jesus heals a woman who's been crippled for 18 years. It says in Luke chapter 13 and verse 14, indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, the synagogue ruler said to the people, there are 6 days for work, so come and be healed on those days, not on the Sabbath. Can you believe it? There are 6 days to work. Healings are working. That's a working thing. Come and be healed on another day. Healing was not to be performed on the Sabbath. But again, Jesus drives down to the fundamental principle. Jesus knew what they were thinking and said to the man with the shriveled hand, get up and stand in front of everyone. Jesus is going to do this publicly. He's not going to hide away. He's going to confront these people with their suggestion. Jesus said to them, I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? They were very keen on what you mustn't do on the Sabbath. Well, what is lawful to do? What is it? What is lawful on the Sabbath? To do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? I wonder if Jesus is actually also exposing their motives here. What were they planning to do? They were planning to do evil. They wanted something to accuse Jesus of. They wanted to do evil. Well, Jesus, perhaps he's highlighting their fault, their Sabbath breaking in the evil that they intended. No, it's obviously lawful to do good, to save life. Because as Ian Campbell says in his little book on the first day of the week, he says, Sabbath was God's gift for the preservation and for the advancement of life. That's what the Sabbath was given for, so that man might rest and recuperate and be re-energized. Part of the purpose of the Sabbath was for the preservation and for the advancement of life. Such a law cannot be invoked to justify inhumanity. It was a law, it was a day that God gave and blessed for us. It's to be a blessed day for us. It wasn't blessed for God, it was blessed for us. And so it's right that blessing should be given on such a day. David Gooding, in his commentary on Luke, says the religious mind is not necessarily interested in common morality about doing evil or doing good, still less in relieving human misery and affliction. It is interested in keeping rules. That's all the religious mind thinks about. It's not really interested in what's right and wrong, good and evil, relieving human misery and affliction. It's interested only in keeping rules. And that's evident here. They give no answer. Jesus looked around at them, said to the man, stretch out your hand. He did so, and his hand was completely restored, but they were furious. The word suggests that they were senseless as they saw what Jesus did, and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus. Here they are. They're echoes, aren't they, of that incident that Jesus draws on, of Saul incensed against David, and after him, here they are, copying Saul and not copying David in their attitude to Jesus. But in the middle of these two events, we have this startling claim of Jesus in verse 6, and we'll conclude as we think about that. Jesus in verse 5, Luke 6 and verse 5, Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." That's a startling claim for Jesus to make. The Sabbath was a divine institution. It's something that God ordained. And Jesus says, "I'm master of the Sabbath." What a claim is that? To say that he's master of something that God has ordained and set out and given. What does Jesus mean by such a claim? Well, he's not Lord of the Sabbath to abolish it. He's Lord and Master of the Sabbath, first of all, to clear away all man-made accretions to it, all that man has added to it with their little rules and regulations. Jesus is going to clear those away, as he does on principle here. Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath to restore it to its original purpose and design, to be a blessing to man. Not to be a burden, to be a blessing. And he's going to bless his disciples with providing for their hunger. This man with the hand for his healing, it's blessed. Jesus is going to clear away all these man-made additions. He's going to restore it to its original purpose and design and transform it eventually into the Christian Lord's Day. A day for the Lord. It's called, John says, doesn't it, in Revelation chapter 1, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day. Not the Sabbath. Now it's the Lord's Day. That's why we meet on a Sunday. It's the Lord's Day, a day for the Lord. As the Sabbath was holy to the Lord, here's a day for the Lord. His worship and service and works of necessity and mercy. That's what we have here in these incidences, works of necessity, providing for need, and works of mercy, ministering to those who need, are in misery and affliction. And so the 1689 Baptist Confession of Faith tells us, as it is the law of nature, that in general, a proportion of time by God's appointment be set apart for the worship of God. So the law of nature tells us that we should set some time apart for God. He has given us so much, our Creator, who has blessed us. He deserves some of our time. Well, so by his word, in a positive, moral, and perpetual commandment, binding all men in all ages, he has particularly appointed one day in 7 for a Sabbath to be kept holy to him, which from the beginning of the world to the resurrection of Christ was the last day of the week, and from the resurrection of Christ was changed into the first day of the week, which is the Lord's Day, and is to be continued to the end of the world as the Christian Sabbath, the observation of the last day of the week being abolished. We don't meet on a Saturday, on a Sabbath, we meet on the Lord's Day. And then they say this, the Sabbath is then kept holy unto the Lord when men and women, after a due preparing of their hearts. So again, it's important, isn't it? It's not about the outward things you do, it's your heart that matters. After a due preparing of their hearts and ordering their common affairs beforehand, do not only observe a holy rest all the day from their own works, words, thoughts about their worldly employment and recreations, but also are taken up the whole time in the public and private exercises of God's worship and in the duties of necessity and mercy. And those truths are built on how Jesus, as Lord of the Sabbath, interacts with the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, with their perversions and additions to God's design. And so we have this conflict regarding the Sabbath. Jesus setting out principles that undergird how it should be used. And he can do so because the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Well, may he grant us grace to know the blessings that this day brings and the glory that God deserves as our Creator, our Redeemer, and Christ, the Lord of all life, for his glory. We're going to sing our closing hymn, God who made the earth